Well, welcome everybody, and thank you all for coming. I'm Bill Cavanaugh. I'm the director of the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology here at DePaul, and I recognize some of you and some of you are new faces, so welcome to everybody. We have an extensive schedule of activities throughout the year, every year, so please do take a flyer and check us out on the website. We've always got something good going on. So today, I'm really excited to hear from our visiting scholar for the fall quarter, Jeane Peracullo from the Philippines. She is current chair of the Department of Philosophy, but is also kind of sneaking around with theologians a lot as well, so kind of bridging philosophy and theology. In fact, she has been named in January by the Global Church Project as one of the Asian female theologians you should explore. So we are really lucky to have her here, and we'll be able to explore some of her thought. She does work that crosses many disciplines, women's and gender studies, environmental philosophy and ethics, youth and religion and culture, and has done all kinds of work both in the Philippines and across Asia on these sorts of matters. So please join me in welcoming Jeane Peracullo.
So much, Bill, for the kind introduction, and thank you so much for coming and listening to this talk. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, but in fact, there are two stories, one of heartbreak and one of hope. And I just wish that I would be able to convey both of them effectively this afternoon. So, let me begin with this question. What is happening to our beautiful land? And this is in fact from a 1988 landmark pastoral letter of the Filipino Catholic bishops of the same title. So the 1988 letter remains to be the most important document of the Catholic bishops on the environment, primarily for two reasons. Firstly, it is one of the earliest documents of the Catholic Church on the environmental crisis. And secondly, the sense of urgency that permeated it would be a refrain in the subsequent CBCP pastoral letters. 21 years and about 11 pastoral letters on the environment later, the impact of the CBCP statements remains uneven. While the anti-mining campaigns that started in the 1970s have had some success, many environmental issues, which are exacerbated by climate change and now emergency, still pose some challenges to the adequacy of the Catholic response. So my presentation revolves around these four questions. How does the case of the Virgen de Caysasay manifest the dissonance between what the CBCP pastoral letters on the environment and the vulnerable state of the bodies of water that are associated with her? And what do these incongruities reveal about the Philippine Catholic Church's engagement with climate change? And are there recommendations to address these dissonances or incongruities? So my presentation is thus structured into these following sections. First, the CBCP's environmental consciousness as manifested in their pastoral letters from 1988 to 2019, the concrete responses of the Catholic community to these letters, the case of the Virgen de Caysasay watery regions, and the recommendations of the study. I hope to show that a wider appreciation of Virgen de Caysasay's importance to the community translates to a deeper recognition of local ecological knowledge which will then translate to political actions to care for the vulnerable bodies of water. There is no similar document on the environment since the CWCIT started issuing pastoral letters in 1940. However, the 1988 letter is criticized to be anthropocentric, promoting a static worldview as well as naive nostalgia for an imagined past that had never happened. So for our purposes, let me just present these core theological responses that the Catholic bishops outlined in that letter. First, that God created the world, and this is their interpretation of Genesis 1:1. Respect for life, and not just for human life. I remain emphatic about this because they have pastoral letters that are talking about pro-life that is not something to do with environment. And the devastation of life on earth calls for the faithful to defend life as they reflect on the beauty of nature and partake of her bounty which nourishes life. The environmental destruction is a moral crisis, and Mary is the mother of life. Now, the theological responses are important insofar as they became the support for subsequent pastoral letters to lean on. However, a notable shift occurred upon the publication of the papal encyclical Laudato Si', which has become the document to refer to when it comes to the Catholic responses to environmental issues since 2015. The bishops have certainly aligned their letters, which came out in 2015, 2018, and 2019 along the lines of the Laudato Si'. Here, this shows my analysis of all 11 pastoral letters on the environment. And we can even narrow them down to these three important themes. First, nature is sacred because life is sacred. So in pastoral letters 1988 and 2000, which specifically have life in their titles, the Catholic bishops did not frame life as exclusive to human life, or even more narrowly to the unborn human life. What the bishops categorically maintain is that nature is sacred because it is teeming with life, which was created by God in all its perfection. That life is sacred and therefore nature is sacred is consistent with the religious worldview about how the world came to be. The second major theme is the cry of the earth is the cry of the poor. The interconnections among development, wealth, power, and the environment in floating society are palpable in most of the pastoral letters after 1988. In fact, the latest letter, July 2019, reiterates the view of the Catholic Church as the Church of the poor, wherein, according to the bishops, the preferential option for the poor pushes us to prioritize the most affected poorest of the poor who cry out to God for justice. It is a moral obligation to respond to their suffering. The Philippines is ranked high among nations where environmental activists are regularly harassed and even killed for their activism. According to Global Witness, 30 environmental activists were killed in 2018 alone. Now, among them are Catholic priests and pastoral workers who had worked with the indigenous peoples and poor farmers to fight for their ancestral domain against large-scale mining. And one of them is Dexter Condes, a young member of the Vincentian community in the Philippines, who on February 22, 2013 was gunned down while he was on his way to a meeting with the nuns of the Daughters of Charity. Dexter was a staunch supporter of the Ati community where he belonged, which is an indigenous ethno-linguistic group in the Visayas region of the country in their fight for their ancestral lands. The earth as the common home. So Laudato Si's influence on the bishops is tangible because the path of the notion of stewardship has changed towards a more critical look at human exceptionalism. The Laudato Si expertly woven the scientific data and theological reflections to preach for just anthropocentrism, my own take on integral ecology, framed in the phrase, care for our common home. that regards the earth as a common home and not just to have dominion over. Global scientists documented the devastating effects and the continuing threats of climate change. In several reports, the scientists pointed to human actions as the major contributor to the global warming that has brought about the crisis in climate. In a theological, social, ecological point of view, not all humans are equally accountable for the ill effects of global warming. Some individuals and persons should be held more accountable for the damage done, and therefore more morally obliged to make amends. Moreover, large human communities, especially those that are dependent on the natural world for their survival, live intimately and symbiotically among all members of the earth, our common home. So the resonance of the pastoral letters on the ground, the emergence of the Catholic Church as a voice of the earth. The Philippines offers a special case to discuss religious engagements with climate change, specifically Catholic engagements. Filipino anthropologist Jeane Peracullo classifies these responses as mobilization, advocacy, and capacity building. My own documentation shows that the responses went beyond these three categories because certain responses, such as staging a hunger strike, installing solar panels, and initiating divestment campaigns are examples of concrete responses that are more action-oriented. A hunger strike is a drastic form of resistance. So these responses to the pastoral letters from 1988 to 2019 manifest as well as affirm the crucial role that the local Catholic Church plays in the public sphere, where she remains consistent and steadfast and appears committed and invested in seeing real transformative changes. The real battle against mining, illegal logging, deforestation, and many more was happening on the ground. Before the 1988 pastoral letter, some dioceses and areas where extensive mining by large corporations was underway. Opposition to mining had already been in place. The global mining industry has taken note of the church's opposition to mining, and an unnamed exploration company president stated that in the Philippines, NGOs, peasants, and church groups override the government constantly. You can spend millions developing a property in the Philippines only to have it swept away by peasants, lobby groups, and churches. In 2015, various dioceses as well as the CWCIT NASA mounted several campaigns against coal-fired power plants. These plans have opened a new frontier in the raging battle that the local Catholic Church has taken upon herself to wage. On January 15 to 19, 2015, Pope Francis visited the Philippines. His itinerary included a visit to Leyte, a coastal province that was heavily affected by Typhoon Haiyan. On June 18, 2015, the papal encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home was released to the public. From 2015, the campaigns against coal intensified with more dioceses coming on board. Climate change campaigns such as advocacy and mobilization also began in 2015. I documented 7 instances of specific responses to the climate change crisis in the form of the shift to renewables, turning zero waste, advocacy campaigns to raise awareness, and they occurred between 2015 and 2019. The Catholic Church in the Philippines has leveraged its considerable influence on the Filipino people concerning environmental issues through its multi-pronged campaigns. Perhaps one of the biggest impacts that the 1988 pastoral letter has is in the form of citation by no less than Pope Francis himself. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis cites the Filipino bishops who turned the wonder world of the seas into underwater cemeteries bereft of color and life. However, there is another way of assessing the impact of that letter in the way that the basic ecclesial communities in the Philippines have widely, on their own, interpreted one of the visions of the Second Plenary Council of the Philippines, a church is a community of disciples, as about the spirituality of stewardship. This interpretation has enabled some BECs to incorporate environmental campaigns into their platforms of action. In other words, the Church of the Poor message of the Second Plenary Council of the Philippines must have resonated more with the Catholic faithful in terms of concrete responses to localized environmental concerns rather than the 1988 pastoral letter. This claim is not surprising because the Church of the Poor offered the blueprint of renewal for the Philippine Catholic Church, and it remains arguably to be the singular local document with which to hold the Church accountable for whether or not she remains on course with the letter and the spirit of the message, Church of the Poor. So my research shows that their responses are concretized through localized actions that have a direct impact on vulnerable communities. Without sustained efforts on the ground, these environmental pastoral letters would be out of touch and esoteric, just like many other church documents. So now we go to the third part, which is exploring the dissonance, the vulnerabilities of Caysasay waters in the age of climate change. In the story narrated by Father Francisco Peracullo, which appeared in the 1834 edition of the book, Synopsis of the History of the Appearance or Apparition of Our Lady of Caysasay, after a passing of time, the lush forest surrounding the village of Caysasay gave way to a bustling town. In the aftermath of change, one of the markers of the apparition of the Virgen was destroyed and a chapel was established in its place. While it was being built, a drought swept through the town. The people, dying of thirst, prayed to the Virgin. The chapel was standing on the banks of the salty waters of the Pansipit River, but there was not a drop to drink. When the situation was about to turn for the worse, one of the workers constructing the chapel struck a rock, and out came gushing spring water for the thirsty people of Caysasay. This tiny snippet in the accounts of the miracles of the Virgen by Father Peracullo alludes to the place of water in Filipinos' consciousness. Water is pushed towards the center of the collective attention of the people only during periods when there is a lack of it, or when one is sick and needs healing after everything else has failed to cure whatever illness plagues a person. It is rather true in the past as it is so in the present. The archipelagic character of the Philippines makes it appear as if the water is plentiful and free-flowing. Many Filipinos certainly think so, and it undermines their perception of the real state of waterways, rivers, lakes, and seas in the country. It blinds them from seeing these bodies of water for what they are at present. The Philippines' extreme vulnerability to climate change is well documented by scientific research in the Climate Links report on climate change vulnerability, which came out in 2017. The Philippines' agricultural and water resources are already strained due to multiple factors, including susceptibility to extreme weather conditions. So large bodies of water are often the most visible witness to the unabated environmental destruction in the country. And the third largest lake in the country, which is of special focus of this paper, is the Taal Lake. About 190,000 people are dependent on the Taal Lake for their livelihood. Fishing is the most popular source of income. Farming is also conducted around the lake with its exceptional ecosystem, which forms part of the Taal volcano protected landscape. However, the protected status afforded to the lake has not prevented it from the relentless assault by overfishing. Illegal fish cages dot the surface of the lake. Moreover, the rapid encroachment of urbanization poses a looming threat to the integrity of the ecosystem. Scientists at the University of the Philippines claim that one of the major sources of the degeneration of the Taal Lake is the sifting and congestion of the Pansipit River. And the Pansipit River is the lone conduit for water and migratory fish species that sow and swim from Taal Lake to the Balayan Bay and back. In fact, the only freshwater mackerel species of mackerel can be found in Taal Lake, and it's now almost extinct. It's called the tawilis. At present, the Pansipit River, which connects Balayan Bay and Taal Lake, has been reduced to a very narrow, meandering body of water, clogged with trash, fish pens, and mud. It is very hard to imagine that it was once majestic. It had been wide enough for ships to pass through, according to historians. The Pansipit River, near the entrance of Taal Town, is very narrow. I was disenchanted to see it for the first time and to see it in its current state. Now, the Virgen of Caysasay region also includes the spring nearby. Present-time devotees' pilgrimage to the Virgen will not be complete without the visit to the Santa Lucia well. The twin wells are located on the west side of the shrine. One has to enter a narrow paved road towards it. What greets the visitors is an ancient ark made of coral stone, the same material as the innermost building structure of the shrine. A brass relief of Mary is etched on the topmost part of the ark. According to local narratives, the well marks the spot where two local women who were gathering firewood found the image of the Virgin perched on the sampag tree when they saw her reflection on the gurgling pool of water when they stooped down to drink. Before this discovery, the Virgin has disappeared for some time. I walked a beaten path towards the Santa Lucia well, and what I saw was the rather pitiful conditions of the wells. Garbage was strewn on the side of the footpath. The creek beside the wells was dry and half-filled with plastics and other refuse. I wondered about the safety of water from the wells, and while I acknowledged the place could well be deemed as banal or sacred, it did not appear to be so in its current state and condition. On September 8, 2012, the then Archbishop of Lipa, Ramon Arquelles, organized the first ever fluvial procession at Taal Lake in honor of the Virgin Mary. According to the news reports, Bishop Arquelles lamented the sorry state of the lake, clogged with fish pens that have become a visual reminder of its neglect. Given through thousands of devotees, it would be held for another 4 years from 2012 up to 2016. However, the number of participants dwindled over time. The coverage of the annual event by major media groups in the country had stopped after the first year. Meanwhile, at the banks of the Pansipit River, an ark which is made of concrete bears the words, "Alay kay mahal na Birhen ng Caysasay," in English, a tribute to the beloved Virgin of Caysasay. The annual fluvial parade begins at this part of the river. Just below the ark is a small board made of tarpaulin, which seems to be recently placed. It warns the public to not throw garbage into the Pansipit River. The river is site for fluvial parades for the patron saints around the area, including the Virgen de Caysasay. During these events, the river becomes sacred again. The fluvial parade recalls the Virgen's origin story. Somehow, the past is someone from more than 400 years ago. However, a contemporary observer can only note that such performance of piety seems pitiful because it does not transform the river at all back to its more pristine condition. The map here is also the map of the performance of piety among the devotees of the Virgen. And if you notice, the physical spaces provide the venue for physical rituals such as pilgrimage, fluvial procession, washing and bathing, dance, and poetry recital. The map as well acts as a therapeutic water spaces, which emphasizes the curative waters of the well which cannot be separated from the lake and the river, and because of that, ecclesiastical regulation exists in the performance of piety surrounding the Virgen de Caysasay. So the popularity of the miracle stories of the Virgen means that the shrine has become a pilgrimage site for devotees. Every year, my own university, Salle University in Manila, organizes the pilgrimage of the sick for all the members of the academic community with serious illnesses like cancer, heart conditions, or a combination of serious illnesses like diabetes with hypertension. The fluvial procession every December 8th, the town of Taal celebrates the feast of the Immaculate Conception. After the 4 p.m. Mass of the shrine, the image of the Virgen is paraded through several barns around town. After the parade, the image is brought to the Pansipit River for the fluvial procession. The twin wells of the Santa Lucia allow the devotee to wash oneself with the miraculous waters. The ritual involves washing the hair and face with water from the well on the left side and cleansing the rest of the body from the well on the right side. They can also bring home with them some of the water for friends and loved ones who are sick. Now, the Subli dance here deserves a special mention because it is a performance of piety that Filipino cultural researcher Elena Merano argues to be its primary. Originally from Bawan, Batangas, Subli is performed in adjacent towns like Agoncillo, Lemery, and Taal. Subli means to jump across. So it involves the legend of the cross of Alitagtag, which predates the Virgen de Caysasay. For the local people, the cross is named Alitagtag, which means in Tagalog to spew dazzling lights. So because it does so to protect the people from all sorts of disasters, both of natural and human origin. So the dance here is actually to appease the deity or Poon inside that cross, because when it was found, the parish priest wanted to move it to the church, but it doesn't want to. It becomes very heavy. So the Subli was created to, and it's a playful dance to appease the deity. And if you notice, this dance is performed by the elderly women in the community, and the movements actually mimic the movements of jumping across rivers and lakes and springs of water. So just this preponderance of water images. However, unique or distinctive to the devotion of the Virgen de Caysasay is the poetry performance called luwa. In most Filipino languages, luwa refers to the act of loudly expressing something out of one's mouth. So here in luwa para sa Virgen de Caysasay, example, the poem is a celebration of the devotee's gratitude to the Virgen. So the rich tradition of this unique oral literature speaks of the endurance of the origin story of the Virgen de Caysasay. So this particular poem was written by one of the nation's best poets, Ramon Landicho, as a response to reports the local Catholic Church wanted the practice to be dropped from the official program of the events of the Fiesta for the Immaculate Conception. At present, poetry performances for the Virgen are conducted inside the shrine chapel. Well, originally, they were performed along the banks of the river, when the fluvial procession go through them. So the neglected state of the Taal, the Pansipit River, and the Santa Lucia well does not reflect the value the community supposedly has bestowed on the Virgen de Caysasay. It reveals the sense of alienation of the community from the material and concrete dimensions of the Virgen. of the community's alienation from the real significance of the Virgen's wanderings, which to me point out to her rootedness in the place, which means to convey that she could be encountered in spaces and places that ordinary people inhabit. And it reveals the distance and alienation from the idea of the land and waters as sacred. So the vulnerabilities of the Virgen de Caysasay water spaces are symptomatic of the general lack of appreciation of the majority of the Filipino people who are Catholics of the symbolic power of icons associated with the natural world. Devotional practices reveal that performance of piety is anchored on a substantial belief in supernatural beings, but such belief does not flow into convictions and resulting actions that extend into public spaces like to care for rivers, canals, lakes, and seas in a sustained manner. I claim that the roots of the incongruities are the following: the lack of sustained efforts by both the Catholic Church and the state to develop local ecological knowledge by sidelining the indigenous spiritual traditions' contribution to faith and scientific knowledge, and the lack of active remembering or appreciation of the past that does not resort to naive nostalgia. Indigenous communities of the world have always considered caves, lakes, trees, and rivers as having natural intrinsic value or are sacred. In tracing the history of sacred objects, we have to move beyond the artifact and return to the story of the community itself. For geographers Dewsbury and Cloak, the surroundings must include spiritual landscapes, for they are not just about religion, but open up spaces that can be inhabited in different spiritual registers. Throughout Southeast Asia, spirits associated with smaller bodies of water, such as springs, lakes, and streams, were usually personified as female, often helpful and supportive. A river bend, a large rock, or unexpected shallow could all mark the home of some watchful spirit who was fiercely protective of its watery domain, thus the need for these friendly female deities. Now, Filipino scholar Gaston Kibitan questions the Catholic Church's complicity in undermining the cultures of indigenous peoples, which came out in 2018. To him, the questioning is necessary despite the history of the Catholic bishops' public statements on respecting and protecting ancestral or indigenous lands. For Tomoko Masusawa, the author of the book, The Invention of Religion, the meaning of religion is contemporary with the Enlightenment period and idea of nationhood. In the Philippines, Christianity was introduced through colonization. The presence of Christianity is always problematic when viewed through a post-colonial lens. This is not to say that the Philippine Catholic Church has not tried to address this problematic. In 2010, the Episcopal Commission on Indigenous Peoples issued a statement that essentially asked for forgiveness from indigenous peoples for the, quote, historical wounds, unquote, which were inflicted for the time when the Church entered indigenous communities from a position of power indifferent to their struggles and pains. Carl Gaspar, himself a religious brother, laments the fact that the statement of the bishops, which in theory should have been read in all parishes, had not been so in many of these churches. In so doing, the platform of action in the statement was not carried out widely. However, it is not just organized Western religion that had sidelined indigenous worldviews. Even scientists tend to ignore local and indigenous knowledge. So the seeming tepid responses of the local community to threats to biodiversity had stumped conservationists, scientists, and environmentalists alike. So as a response to this dilemma, some Filipino psychologists attempted to seek what they call as cognitive and affective dimensions of the biodiversity. and they were determined to uncover the lived experiences of the residents at the banks of Taal Lake. So what they uncovered were the following. Respondents possessed conceptual models of the Taal Lake and aligned their assumptions, beliefs, perceptions, and feelings according to this. Some respondents' beliefs on the physical dimensions of the lake hindered their acceptance of the vulnerable status of the lake. At some point, they contradict scientific evidence. For example, they think that the lake is unfathomable, that it drains directly to the ocean. So therefore, the fish kill is only confined in just one small portion of the lake. So totally belies scientific evidence. On the other hand, some respondents believe that the mystical properties of the lake to some extent undermine their proactive responses by saying, she is displeased. This is her form of punishment. Respondents who operated big fish farms in the lake, worked from Manila and other towns, tend to be emotionally and sentimentally unattached to the lake itself. Those who were born and have lived their lives on the banks of the lake tend to be sentimentally attached to the lake. They share their feelings of affection as well as of pain upon seeing the pollution and fish kill happening. One respondent was moved to tears as she spoke about her feelings for the lake. I love the lake very much. I don't need to say it. My life is for the lake, to defend her and care for her as long as I'm alive. Those who live by the banks of the lake were more open and receptive to its rehabilitation and care. In Filipino, the word tahanan refers to home. Its root word is tahan. It evokes a mother rocking her fuzzy, crying baby to calm down and to sleep. It pulls forth the original meaning of ecology, which is oikos, a Greek word for home. Many Filipinos regard the home as the safest place because it evokes the warm embrace of a mother. In the study that I cited, the proximity to the lake evoked affective attachments to it. The lake is also seen as a mother, nurturing and just. However, the lake has increasingly become vulnerable. And what adds to the alienation is the Roman Catholic Church's position concerning Mary's holiness, which is demonstrated in its active support of the proliferation of the images of Mary found in almost all corners of the Philippines that depict her to be Caucasian with a narrow nose and blue eyes. For me, it partly explains why the river is not accorded the sacred status. According to theologian Ramon Chica, the devotional practices that are heavily promoted by the Catholic Church in the Philippines tend to focus on the otherworldly concerns and are apolitical. In a pastoral letter on the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Catholic bishops extol the numberless benefits the devotion to Mary has brought to the believers. The bishops acknowledge that this performance of piety helped keep their faith alive, but these practices stop short in bringing about transformative action that will benefit the greater community. The bishops rule the privatists, even in social events like pilgrimage or fiesta, take on faith, but they themselves did not offer a way to reorient such devotional practices towards a communal or shared conviction for social transformation. What had been long considered as banal na puok or sacred space is now sacred only in symbolic way, or only in fleeting moments such as annual fiesta, the Holy Week, or pilgrimage for the sick. The tuklong or makeshift altar for the image of a deity used to mark sacred sites in the country before organized religions arrived at its shores suggests that these spaces were sacred long before the foreign missionaries would have declared them to be so by a Mary or a cross found there. Active remembering or appreciation in the past. For geographer Lily Kong, the sacred is equated with the attachments people develop with a certain place that evokes personal and histories of religious adherence, contributing to the development of personal attachments and a sense of place. Just like the town of Taal, the minor basilica of St. Martin of Tours, also in Taal, considered to be the largest Catholic church in Southeast Asia, had moved along with its people. Though markers around town tell of the establishment of Taal at 1572, those who know about the town's history acknowledge that this date points to a distant past when Taal was established at the banks of the Taal Lake. About a few hundred meters away, the shrine of our Virgen de Caysasay stands in its location since the 17th century. It became a refuge for the people of Taal who fled the devastating volcanic eruption. While there was considerable damage to the shrine itself, it withstood the onslaught. The historical narrative highlights the connections between and among the bodies of water in the Caysasay region. The connections are not only defined by the physical boundaries, but are also determined symbolically by the lived experiences of the community and the people therein. The great volcanic eruption in 1754 was a time of great distress. It had forced the community to move and relocate elsewhere, but it had found its way to Caysasay. Over time, these connections were forgotten, physical boundaries were withdrawn, the symbols and meanings were relegated to myth and to be destined as residual vestiges of stories from the distant past. Yet, in the face of continuing onslaught against the physical and cultural landscapes by forces that are simply too overwhelming to resist, there remain rooted in the land and waters guideposts towards re-enchantment and ultimately survival. Phenomenologist Gaston Bachelor issues a dire warning. Soon, if we do not know where we are going, we no longer know who we are. Anthropologist Didier de la Cruz observed that unlike traditions that derive from doctrinal beliefs such as Immaculate Conception or scriptural passages such as La Piedra, the use of place names as identifiers grounds the Mother of God in the terrestrial. I would go even further to claim that in the case of Virgen de Caysasay, the town is named after her. She was not named after the town. Or to be more exact, after the kingfishers, Caysasay, which flocked around the sampaga tree where her image was found perched after another episode of disappearance. The Murillo Velarde map of 1734, considered to be the most definitive ancient map of the Philippines, would show a place named Caysasay, the southern eastern part of the lake. So the origin story of the Virgen de Caysasay must be framed against the backdrop of both Pansipit River and Taal Lake. These bodies of water are its starting point in their context, even though De La Cruz points out that iconographically speaking, Mary was always from somewhere else. But when one looks deeper into the stories of disappearance and subsequent appearances of the Virgen de Caysasay, she had not wandered off very far from where she was originally found. Now, there are two competing narratives about the Virgen's origin before she was fished out of the Pansipit River. So after Maningkad turned the figure over to the local Spanish priest, the latter subsequently declared that she was an image of the Immaculate Conception. She must have dropped off a Spanish galleon which plied the Pansipit River. The other narrative, however, declares her to be a statue of Matsu, a Chinese Taoist goddess of the sea. The Spanish missionaries who were tasked to convert the natives to Christianity would act on their interest by declaring the mysterious figure about 10 inches high to be a manifestation of the Virgin Mary. The figure in reality is of a woman in flowing robes with hands reposed in prayer standing on a lotus flower. The lotus flower is a prominent symbol in Eastern religions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, and Taoism. So the multitude multitude of water images in both the cross of Alitagtag and the Virgen de Caysasay is no doubt a result of the lived experiences of the people surrounded as they were by actual lakes, rivers, and springs of water. Reimagining the performance of piety. So when we look into the history of the town of Taal and its multiple wanderings and juxtapose it with the episodes of the Virgin's disappearance and appearance, both are parallel to each other. Could it be possible that the Wandering Virgin is a symbol for the wandering town surrounding Taal Lake as the people fled volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and the rising water levels in the lake? I would like very much to think so, and this undertaking to actively remember the connection as well as the meaning becomes an urgent task. So, how to reimagine the performance of piety? Now, the pilgrimage for the sick could now be reimagined as the pilgrimage and the act of visiting as a pilgrimage for a sick river, lake, and wells. The waters cannot possibly heal someone who is equally sick and struggling like itself. The bathing and drinking of water at the Santa Lucia wells. At present, the water cannot heal the sick because its source may be contaminated. Not to drink it is basic common sense. But how do we reconcile the two realities that the water at the well inhabits? One, of course, is that it is just an ordinary water that we use for drinking and bathing. The other one is that it is sacred. Now, the reconciliation of these two realities can be found or mitigated by an idea that holy wells can be sites of indigenous health and a resource for an indigenous population that is lacking in medical resources. At present, there is no published research on the curative powers of the water of the well and the plants and trees that grow around the area, unlike the vibrant research on the curative aspects of Ireland's holy wells. The fluvial procession is reimagined as an activity towards the actual material transformation of the river that is consistent with its symbolic power as the birthplace of the Virgen de Caysasay. The reimagined procession can inform the scientific community about solutions to environmental problems by taking into account local ecological knowledge rooted in ancient cultures and tradition. The river as a birthplace suggests her affinity to it. She is as endemic to the river as the mackerel and sardine fish varieties that make the river their birthplace. The fourth is the celebration of a Sabbath and a Jubilee for the environment. This is a modest suggestion on my part as an addition to the performances of piety already in place. This is really about letting the land and the waters rest from the relentless onslaught that has brought massive and irreversible damage. Maria Paz Luna, herself an environmental activist, calls for the rest from the fishing activities in Taal Lake so that it could be healthy enough for fishes to thrive. In 2000, the Catholic Church had embarked on a year-long celebration of Jubilee during the papacy of Jeane Peracullo, and they drew inspiration from Jesus' words in John 10:10, that they may have life and have it abundantly. Conclusion. So the site specificity of the Virgen de Caysasay lends itself to a heightened awareness of the surroundings that include the landscape, water spaces, and the community, as well as the performance of piety. The enduring elements in the stories about her are actual physical spaces that generations of people have inhabited for centuries. I established that the healing that devotees of the Virgen de Caysasay are praying for is a cure against multiple levels of alienation, dissonance, and brokenness. Rituals and performances of piety could be reimagined as transformative avenues that not only address multiple ills, but also provide the impetus for collective actions towards healing. I explored the CBCP's environmental consciousness through the examination of its pastoral letters. These letters seem to be aligned with the points raised by Filipino environmental activists. This suggests that when it comes to social justice issues, the bishops have addressed them, albeit unevenly. However, there are notable standouts, and the writers of these particular letters are bishops in dioceses where environmental destruction and extreme poverty are prevalent. From 1970 up to 2019, there is a growing number of dioceses and Catholic communities with environmental desks to address a myriad of environmental concerns. These responses and the forms of action, whether direct or indirect, tend to be localized. And these efforts are only carried out because local Catholic communities as well as progressive groups are invested in these issues, specifically mining, deforestation, and increasingly, since 2015, climate change, because these issues impact their vulnerable communities significantly. The Catholic Church is practically the only institution Filipinos can trust to speak out against environmental and other abuses. This insight becomes extremely important, framed within the social justice impetus that characterizes liberation theology. Nature is the new poor, and to care for the earth means to care for the most oppressed and the poorest sectors of the biotic community. And as consistent with Jesus' ministry, the fundamental option is still to care for the most suppressed, marginalized, and most exploited of all God's creation. Thank you for your kind attention.
Well, we've got about 15 minutes for questions and conversation, if anybody wants to start us off.
Yes. Is anything being done at this point, practically speaking, to restore the lake, Taal Lake?
I'm talking about some efforts. Normally, these efforts involve the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and this is about really trying to stop these massive fish kills that are happening in Taal Lake and also in Pansipit River. But they have always met resistance from that, and I didn't really touch on that about these competing, what I call competing sacred forms, like, for example, the state has to care also for just 110 million people, of course, right? And also that when we talk about maybe the religious aspect of it, that is also something that is considered to be maybe not considered to be mutually exclusive to what is going on to change that, right? So, but what I'm saying is that they shouldn't be considered as mutually exclusive, because many, and in fact, I shared to my friends my frustration for just the really lack of relevant research on the spiritual aspects of biodiversity, because the scientists go to these communities and tell them what to do. You do this, you do that, the water is this, the water is that. But then we found out that there are, in fact, competing worldviews about the Taal Lake, right? And you just kind of prioritize one over the other. There has to be this integrated approach towards mitigating these problems, and with the hope that this could actually be stopped, and and the damage could be reversed.
Is the fishing that's being done, is it being done mostly by small fisher people, families, or are there larger corporations now being involved in the fishing?
Both. And in that study that I cited, those who live by the banks of the lake, they are more open to its rehabilitation and care. rather than those who only see the lake and the river as source of fishing, basically. So they're not inclined actually to work for its rehabilitation and care.
Jeane, have things gotten worse under Duterte?
Oh yes, yes, definitely. You know, and actually, on my original paper, I considered that portion as lamentations. You know? And that's why I said this is so heartbreaking, primarily because Duterte has painted the Catholic Church, you know, in a corner where the Catholic Church is considered to be the state's enemy. Okay? That nothing's good is going to come out of the Catholic Church's efforts, right? And so it's like banging your head onto a wall that is just that's not going to budge or whatever. So you can see that there is no effort at all to by the president. But when we go to communities, when we go to local communities, there we see this cooperation because they all live there. You know, whether you work for the government or you work for the, you know, for these fisheries, or you work with your parishioner, you know, our parish priest, they all work together, you know, to rehabilitate their communities. It's so different when you go to the ground, really, you know, and see these, for me, stories that are just so hopeful, you know, and I think that it's very important. Yes, sir.
You talk about the spiritual and then the pragmatic and scientific aspects of a pretty complex story. And one of the things that sort of emerged to me is you talk about the earth almost as though, you know, it's a mythological creature like this Mother Earth myth. And the earth is basically a habitation God's given us. And he said, you know, subdue the earth, be fruitful and multiply. And when Peter didn't want to eat some of the foods that weren't kosher, God said, kill and eat. So the earth is basically here to use, but not to abuse. But when I hear you speaking about river and lake deities, you know, that's part of a mythology like Zeus and Hera. It won't bring people closer to God or closer to the solution. And I'm not hearing about people using prayer like the rosary, like offering masses, like doing the things that would reach to God for the healing of those things which need healing.
Yeah, well, these stories, of course, when we look at Philippine stories, and I've actually shared, you know, the story of the moving cross or the cross of Alitagtag, you know, these stories are so deep. They run even before Christianity had arrived, you know, to the Philippines. And what I am saying is that these myths are, of course, or these stories, you know, I'm not saying that they actually happened, but these are a wellspring of inspirations. You know, these are, they talk of, they evoke this whole connections, you know, to the distant past when, you know, pre-scientifically they used to explain phenomena in this way, right? And so I always tell my students about the Bible. The Bible, of course, is always going to be relevant because it, not so much that it is a historical document, but because it speaks to us about the truth of the human condition. It speaks to us about who we are. It's just the past, present, and future coming together. The whole, what this feminist German theologian Ulrike Alba says, the radical imaginary. You know, so that all of these connections can be established again, you know, so that we can draft a future for us, you know, that will not undermine one tradition over the other. So that's just what I'm saying. In fact, in my presentation of the performances of piety, right, I established that the people themselves really want to make, you know, to show their appreciation of the land by having these devotional practices. So it is not like they went back, you know, to the pre-Christian ways, or saying that we should abandon this in favor of the other. It's just, these are all part of the present realities of the community.
But it's also like Franciscan spirituality and Celtic spirituality, which is much more in tune with nature. And I think we need to honor that. I mean, there are many different ways, languages to speak to God, and there is not a language God doesn't understand. And nature is one of the most basic languages to communicate with God. God is in nature. That's how, and God's love is in nature. He created nature just like created us. So to be in harmony with God's creation is to be with God.
Thank you.
Well, just we don't let us not forget that we are to worship God and not worship earth. Okay, so earth is part of God's creation, but we won't worship earth. Otherwise, we're gonna lose the whole meaning.
Thank you.
Can you explain further with regards to sudden climate change? Why is it happening and what is being done to save it? Because it's killing millions of fish.
Yeah, 2 days ago, about 1,000 scientists of the world came together to actually submit a report by saying that this is not just about climate change already. This has become climate emergency. You know, that the dire consequences of the rise in temperature, and they have actually a goal. Like, we're closer. If the temperature rises up to 2 degrees Celsius, then we are all doomed. So they're plotting that, how near are we to the 2 degrees Celsius threshold. So as I am speaking right now, there is a massive typhoon which is forming in the Pacific Ocean. Now, just to let you know that the typhoons in the Pacific Ocean are born in the Philippines. Thank you very much. I don't know how to do this. They are born in the Philippines, and they create such, havoc to either Taiwan or Japan or in the Philippines. And according to scientists, to meteorologists, this could be the biggest typhoon that they have ever seen in their entire career as meteorologists. And it's forming right now in the Pacific Ocean. It is because the waters around the Philippines is warmer than usual. Warmer than usual. You know, and the cost,
the changes come like every 30 years, up and down, up and down. It's not just like the world won't end in 10 years, in 5 years.
No, they're much more powerful now.
You know, it goes by episodes. 30 years, 30 years, 30 years, up and down. So it's not exactly like that.
yeah,
I'm
but
looking at some information,
so just so the consequences consequences of that, when the seas are warmer, then we have these super typhoons, that just recently struck Japan, Hagibis, right? And when the temperature of the seas is also higher than usual, then we have massive fish kills, and that just that phenomenon spill over many of the coastal areas of the Philippines. So the Philippines is extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change.
It's actually not a 30-year trend,
Yeah,
because it's just getting worse.
You can check Pacific Decadal Oscillation.
It's getting worse.
We have a climate scientist in the room.
Yeah.
Mark, would you like to weigh in?
If you look at the reports, hurricanes are very difficult. Obviously, warmer water can create stronger hurricanes. There's other factors involved that are a little complicated with vertical winds. But the best prediction for hurricanes is that you'll see actually fewer but stronger. That's what the scientists say. But they're not, the scientists will tell you they're dead certain the world is getting warmer. That they're very, very, very clear on. It's much more cautious, their statements about hurricanes, because of the complexity and the interactions. There is a specific decadal oscillation. There are these other, El Nino, obviously. So it is more complicated. And it does seem, and there's steering of hurricanes, and unfortunately it seems like recently with the Philippines that this has gotten worse. Saying it's because of climate change is a little difficult, but it's certainly consistent with the warmer water. So.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
It's related to this. In some of my research, which is not highly scientific, where we are sitting right now, about 11,600 years ago, was solid ice. And
much longer. It's 2020. That is gone by. Yeah, we understand ice ages.
Yeah, so there's been 5 ice ages, and
no,
we're doing
that's not true. It's more like 20.
Okay, but the point is that there's these cycles of cooling and warming, and so how do you as a scientist?
Because it's by looking at those various cycles that makes us so worried about current warming. Because each time there's cycles, when it gets warm, CO2 goes up. When it gets cold, CO2 goes down. We're forcing CO2 up. That's the exact reason we're so worried about climate change. So that by looking at those cycles is what convinces us that climate change is happening, and it's going to be really bad.
Climate change changes all the time. That's the next change.
Weather changes all the time.
It's actually, they're calling it climate disaster now.
Well, within 30 years.
Who are they? Anyway, okay. All right, let's go back to her.
Sorry.
Sorry.
It's all Phil's fault for bringing me into it.
Yeah.
It's
there's a lot of ways in which the science has become secondary to political interests, and I think it's always good to appeal to what the scientists have to say, and that's why I called you into the conversation. Yeah.
It's a good illustration, because something like the Earth is warming and CO2 is responsible, that we're sure about. Hurricanes are tougher.
Yeah.
They're tougher to understand all the complexities. We think they'll change, but predicting how and when and all the details. And I'm not that kind of scientist, so I'm saying what others have said.
Well, it looks like we're just about out of time. Then, before I ask you to join me in thanking Jeane one more time, announcements. Our next event is actually Father Joe Fitzgerald, a Vincentian priest who's been working with indigenous people in Panama for years, and is reputed to be a really great speaker. So that's January 30th, I believe.
Yeah, so it's several months away, but you'll see the flyer on the table there. Yeah, he's a younger. If you think of younger as like your 40s, he's a younger and he's been he's been there most of his adult life since he's been ordained. He's been working in Latin America, and is actually, I think, executive secretary of Panama's Indigenous Bishops' Council, Indigenous Committee or something like that, which is kind of amazing for a native Brooklyn. But yeah.
So somewhat in continuity with the discussion about indigenous people today, for which please join me in thanking Jeane.